The project I'm going to talk to you today about is called Grayscale Value Kaleidoscope Drawing. So why do we need to learn about grayscale? Learning to see value is a foundation of art. Artists regularly check their work in grayscale form. Here's artist James Richards' painting in a grayscale version of it. So as you can see, look in this area right here, you can see that you have the whitest whites and the darkest darks and all the values in between. That makes a strong painting. When this artist checked her painting in grayscale, she said, "When I removed the color, I saw that I could have pushed my value ranges had I first used a value scale to determine my darkest darks and my lightest lights." If you compare this is pretty. It looks nice. But when you look at it in grayscale, her darks aren't that dark and her whites aren't that white. That's probably a 2 as opposed to a 1. So you can push the value ranges and get a stronger picture. So I know you think this is fascinating, right? So what is our project? I'm going to talk to you about a kaleidoscope drawing. So our project will be one, we're going to choose an image that interests you but is not too complicated. Draw it in line art form, create a kaleidoscope lines, shade from value 5 to 1, and then do the opposite in the next span, 1 to 5. And whenever you meet a line, the value shading will begin anew. And I will be going over this, so hang on. So step 1 is here we have a hummingbird with a flower. If you notice, it is drawn in line art form. That means there's no shading. We just have the lines that we need to represent our item. Step 2 is kaleidoscope lines. Usually you put the dot in the center, and then you need to draw lines going through that. They will bisect that. And you need to draw a minimum of 6 lines, which is 12 wedges. So this is 1 line, 2 line, 3 line. So if you're counting the wedges, it's 12. If you're counting the lines, it's 6. So alternate bands of shading from value 1 to 5 and 5 to 1. So look here. Here we're going from dark to light. Here we're going from dark to light, and they're going in opposite directions. And this is what we're talking about, dark to light. We hit a line, it goes from dark to light again. So you have to work slowly and properly in this. Anytime you hit a line, so here it's dark to light, anytime you hit a line, you're going to restart the value. So one, you have to think about where you're going to be finishing it at to make sure you have that full range of value in it. And then you also need to think about which direction, which is the dark and which is the light direction. So you do have to think slowly and carefully as you go through this, especially when you have detailed areas like this, which is why we don't want too complicated of an image. So an option would be, if you can't think of an image to find, is shapes. It will work just as well with this. You would do the same thing, the opposite shading, one direction, making sure you're blending it as you go. So don't do this. This is an example of what not to do. And the shading is impeccable. That's not the problem here. The problem is the design. The design has an apple that is small and in the center. It's a little off center. And that's a lot of shading to do. Now, if you really like shading, you absolutely can do something like this. But this is going to be quite the little beast to shade right here, going from a dark to the light. It's not impossible. It's just going to be really time consuming. And it's not the best design choice. And before you think I'm making fun of a student's thing, this is my work. And when I saw what I did with this wedge and didn't put a line in there, I was trying very much not to do equal spaces. I wanted to see the difference that it would do. Yeah, this one made me stop. See, even teachers sometimes go, oops. So here's some student example. The shading on this one is very rough, but you can see how they chose their image. They have a anchor with a wheel in it, and I really like the details they put in here to make it pop out. Here's another student piece that is a dream catcher. It's quite lovely the way they do that. and have rendered it, and look at the difference here where they go from lights to dark and darks to light. You always have to think of the opposite. This one did not have the main piece in the center. They had it above the center, and that is okay. Here is a different technique on it, or a different take on it. They had their line off here and did the points down from the corner. And here's the one I went to after I got tired of the apple. As you can see, I haven't figured out or haven't finished with my leaves yet. I'm working on what I'm going to do with that, but my bands are going opposite, and I didn't want to do a kaleidoscope on this one. I wanted to do a linear one, which is actually going to be a little bit harder because that means that this center band through here all has to be the same tone if I'm doing my gradations correctly. So this is a little bit more advanced of a project, but I did want to show you a way you can interpret it. Now that we've looked at the project details, let's again go over the expectations. We're going to choose an image that interests you, but it's not too complicated. And this is what's called an original image. No SpongeBob here, people. Draw it in line art format, which means no shading. Create the kaleidoscope lines. You need to have 6 lines or 12 wedges. Then you're going to shade your values from 5 to 1 and do the opposite in the next band, 1 to 5. Whenever you meet a line, the shading will begin anew. So you have to look at where you're going in your image. So this is the full image here, and I blew up this little part here just so you can see the gradation coming. Especially in this one, you can see how as it gets to the line, that line being the hummingbird's head, once we hit that line, we're going to start it anew. The band is going to be the opposite way, the next one over, and so this would be from the dark to the light when that's rendered in. You have to look at where you're going with your shading. Now, they don't get down to a 1. They get to about a 2 here. So, you can decide if you want to go all the way to white. I think going to 2 is fine. You need to go as light as possible, but this lets you see the overview of how it's going to be. All right, I have one more thing to show you, which is I'm going to give you a grayscale. So here you have a 5-value grayscale. You go from the darkest dark to the lightest light, and the values in between. So as you're doing your shading, you need to keep this in mind. The higher you get in art, you'll use 10 scales and 10 value scales. We're just starting out with 5. Yours shouldn't be this chunky. It should be blended, but it helps you see the value steps as they go along. Most of the hummingbird was done in this range right here, these 3 right here, with a little bit dark. You'll probably need to borrow an ebony pencil to get that dark. The white would just be the white of the paper. All right, so let's talk about any questions.